All right. Well, thanks to everyone who is joining us today for the Smoke Free for Me June Action Period call. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And again, just a welcome and thank you to all of our program partners who help administrate this project, and several of them are joining us on the line today, so we appreciate your input and all the support you provide for this project. Just quickly, I will review the agenda for today. We're going to do a quick roll call and see who else on the line. Also, Dr. Mojave Gittens will be presenting today on vaping facts and talking points for families. And then Sam will be also running through the monthly run charts, and we'll just have a quick wrap-up. So with that, I've already heard several folks, so I just want to run through our list. So I believe we have Tiffany with us from Locust Pediatric Group.
Yes, I'm here.
Tiffany, are you still on? Okay, great. Do we have anyone from Cornerstone Pediatrics? Anyone from Children's Medical Center Middletown? I see we have Dr. Hornick on the webinar. Are you also on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. And then Christina, it looks like I see you also on the webinar. Are you on from Cleveland Clinic Medina?
Yep, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. And then do we have anyone on yet from COPC? Okay. Eastgate Pediatrics. Fairfield Primary Care. And I believe Dr. Warwick is on the line from Group Health Anderson.
Yep, I'm here.
Right. Anyone from Ohio Pediatrics? I've gotten a message. I see Dr. Lazaron is on the webinar, but she's having trouble with the phone, so I'm going to send her those codes, but she is on the webinar. And then it looks like Dr. Hummel is on the webinar. Are you also on the line?
No, actually, Dr. Hummel's still with patients. This is Lisa stepping in for her.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you again, Lisa, for joining us.
Sure.
And then we have Dr. Hammond from Wheeling Pediatrics.
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Well, we will, with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Mojave Gittens, and she can get started with her presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. So today I'm going to go through some facts about vaping and some talking points. I'm going to give a brief summary because not everybody is that familiar with e-cigarettes, just so that we can know how to talk to our families and patients about them. And then I'm going to give some details on the effects that we think are present and that are caused by e-cigarettes, and then some talking points around all of that. Okay, so hang on a quick second. So this first slide shows specifically what are e-cigarettes. So e-cigarettes are made of a battery, as you guys can see, and an atomizer. I don't know if I can use a pointer, Kristen. If I can, it's fine. An atomizer with a heating coil and an absorbent material that absorbs the liquid that, in general, contains nicotine, flavoring, and chemicals. The battery itself allows the atomizer to heat the liquid, which is called e-juice, and that creates an aerosol that's breathed into the lungs and breathed out into the air repeatedly. Some of these devices are preloaded with the e-juice that comes in bottles that we can see on the bottom right there, and others are such where the users add it in themselves. We've also had some people who just kind of make it up as they go along. They might take candy and melt it and mix it with water and create e-juice that way. The original e-cigarettes look like a cigarette. They came preloaded, and they were disposable. So here are some examples of e-cigarette products, and they've definitely progressed over time. So you can have an e-pipe, an e-cigar. You can have a large tank-like device. You can have a medium-sized tank device. You can have rechargeable e-cigarettes, and you can have disposable e-cigarettes, and many combinations in between. I thought it'd be appropriate to just talk a little bit about Juuls, because I'm sure you guys have heard a good deal about them. The biggest concern with Juuls is among youth, but also among adults, especially if you have young adults who are the parents in your practices. And the biggest concern is that it delivers the same amount of nicotine that's found in a pack of cigarettes, which is a big deal. Just for terminology's sake, I'm just going to say juuling or Juul is the verb used to describe someone who's actually using it. So someone might say, I'm going to Juul on my way home. All Juul pods contain the same amount of nicotine found in a pack of cigarettes, as I mentioned before. Juuls use salt-based nicotine, which helps deliver nicotine like a cigarette. Free-based nicotine is what you commonly find in most e-juices, so with the other e-cigarette devices. So the Juul pod has about 59 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter, very high amount, which can, of course, really hook youth and adult smokers on nicotine big time. E-juices found on the market, just for reference sake, are usually anywhere from 0 to 36 milligrams of nicotine per ml, so big difference. Juul pods are not refillable, unlike other vape devices in which the tank can be refilled with e-juice. So what's the big deal about the flavorings? So the problem with flavorings, of course, as we know, is that there are many, many, many different kinds of flavors and many different concentrations of nicotine that you can have in these e-juices. There are over 7,000 flavors of e-liquid that are made with flavoring chemicals and may or may not contain nicotine. The e-juice is heated inside the device and creates the flavors and aerosol that is inhaled into the body and out into the air. Like I said, 7,000 flavors. They have a strong appeal to teenagers, preteens, and of course young adults as well. The various trendy flavors have been a very successful marketing strategy that allows the e-cig or vape user to consume nicotine without the harsh taste of cigarettes. But the flavors themselves pose a risk to the e-cigarette user themselves because some flavors have been shown to be toxic due to the chemicals that they contain. For example, various cinnamon flavors contain cytotoxic compounds such as cinnamaldehyde and 2-methoxycinnamaldehyde. The cherry flavor, also popular, has benzaldehyde, and all of which has some toxicity and many other toxic chemicals too. This next slide here doesn't show all that well, but what it's supposed to show is all of the chemicals that have been found in the e-cigarette aerosol. There's some in yellow that I can't show on the webinar that are known to be harmful, and while we didn't know this at first, but a lot of these chemicals are the same exact things that we see in cigarettes, and we're learning more each day as research is being done. So simply put, e-cigarettes produce a vapor or aerosol that contains things like propylene glycol, glycerin, flavorings, nicotine, and many, many other harmful chemicals and toxins, some of which are known to cause cancer. And as we know, nicotine is highly addictive. And even though not all of them have nicotine, so many of them do, and that's the biggest problem because we still don't have regulations on the amount of nicotine or what can go in them yet. Okay, so now we'll talk a bit about the effects of e-cigarettes on health and various talking points. Like I said, I'll give a bunch of information, but then we'll kind of hone it in a little bit later on the biggest things that you can talk to parents about. Okay, so the big thing I know that a lot of you are hearing is that parents say, well, e-cigarettes are safe because they just create water vapor. Well, the first issue there is that they actually do not create water vapor. If you really want to go by strict definition, so do you think e-cigarettes or vape pens create a vapor, gas, or aerosol? The answer is that they create an aerosol, and the simple reason is that a gas, as we know, is a substance with, can expand indefinitely and completely fills the space or air that it's in. A vapor is the same as a gas, but it can also be used to create something that has visible exhalation like steam or fog. So think of steam from a teapot, for example. The strict definition of an aerosol, though, fits e-cigs because an aerosol is a mixture of liquid particles suspended in a gas. So instead of just mixing with the air like a pure gas does, aerosols leave droplets behind. So that's why e-cigs produce aerosols, and then this aerosol, once they breathe it in, that the aerosol that's created enters the lungs and then is exhaled out into the air. It's really important to emphasize this to parents because these droplets and particles go into their lungs, and then when they breathe it out, it goes out into the air, especially if they're vaping right around their kid or if they are vaping in the same room as their child or the car as their child. This is not safe because of the droplets. Okay. So in terms of some more talking points, so what is actually in the e-cigarette aerosol? So e-cigarette aerosol that users breathe from the device and exhale can contain harmful and potentially harmful substances such as nicotine, ultrafine particles that can be inhaled deeply into the lungs, particles that can cause respiratory and eye irritation, flavorings such as diacetyl, a chemical linked to serious lung disease, volatile organic compounds, cancer-causing chemicals, and heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead. And it's difficult for consumers to know exactly what e-cigarette products contain. Some e-cigarettes, for example, are marketed as containing 0% nicotine, but they've sure enough have been found to contain nicotine. And of course, there are unknown long-term health impacts from repeated inhalation. This was something interesting that I thought that I would talk about because I had not been familiar with this. So diacetyl and a closely related compound 2,3, I don't even know how to say that, pentanedione, cause popcorn lung, which is also known as constrictive bronchiolitis obliterans. This irreversible respiratory disease was named after the factory workers inhaled artificial butter flavoring while working, causing the small airways in the lungs to become irreversibly scarred and constricted and impaired breathing. Diacetyl has been found in many e-cigarettes with sweet flavors. E-cigarette users are now directly inhaling this harmful chemical into their lungs. In fact, some researchers at Harvard found that 39 of the 51 e-cigarette brands contain diacetyl. The study also found two similarly harmful chemicals, 2,3-pentanedione and acetone, present in 23 and up to 23 and 40, actually some found 46 of the 51 flavors it tested. And roughly 92% of the e-cigarettes had at least one of these three chemicals present. Okay. Another talking point is to just talk about what we were specifying with e-cigarette aerosol. So in this slide, we had hoped to have animation, but it didn't quite work out. But just like cigarette smoke, e-cigarette produces an aerosol that produces secondhand aerosol if your child is around you while you are actually smoking. So that happens when, the child is in close proximity and the parent is vaping. It's also likely that secondhand aerosol from e-cigarette devices is harmful. We know that they contain dangerous particles and nicotine. There's also evidence that third-hand aerosol leaves nicotine and other deposits on surfaces in rooms where e-cigs have been vaped. And of course, these are dangerous to children. Okay, so what about the nicotine in e-cigarettes? So most e-cigarettes contain nicotine, and of course that's highly addictive. It's toxic to developing fetuses. Nicotine can harm adolescent brain development, which continues into the early to mid-20s, and it's a health danger for pregnant women and their developing babies, and it's a neurostimulant at low doses and a depressant at high doses. Nicotine overdose causes nausea and vomiting, excessive salivation, abdominal pain, pallor, sweating, hypertension, tachycardia, ataxia, tremor, headache, dizziness, muscle fasciculations, and seizures. So you can get this in parents who are saying, well, I'm going to smoke my cigarettes. Maybe I'll decrease a little bit because I'm vaping. and they think that they're not getting the same amount of nicotine when in fact they can actually be getting increased nicotine from what they were getting from smoking straight cigarettes alone. And what's tricky about this is that the amount of nicotine that you actually get depends on a number of factors. So many factors will affect aerosol delivery. So user factors such as the puff duration, the puff volume, the user's experience, device factors such as the solvent that the e-juice is in, the voltage, the wick design, the efficiency, the draw resistance, the atomizer design, the heating element resistance, and then whether it's manually or automatically activated. So again, really hard to determine just how much nicotine the parents or youth are getting. Another issue with kids, of course, is that e-cigarettes can cause unintended injuries. So defective e-cigarette batteries have caused fires and explosions, some of which have resulted in serious injuries. Most explosions happened when the e-cigarette batteries were being charged. Acute nicotine exposure can be toxic. Children and adults have been poisoned by swallowing, breathing, or absorbing e-cigarette liquid through their skin or eyes, and it has caused death. There have been several cases of suicide by nicotine and one reported child death in the U.S., and I'm sure there are others that have not been reported in terms of the poisonings and overdoses that we've seen. An important point is a lot of parents say, well, I'm doing it because it's going to help me to quit smoking. However, e-cigarettes are currently not approved by the FDA as a cessation aid. There is insufficient evidence to recommend e-cigarettes for smoking cessation in adults, including in pregnant women. To date, the few studies on the issue are very mixed. A Cochrane review found evidence that from 2 RCTs that e-cigarettes with nicotine can help smokers stop smoking in the long term compared with placebo. But the problem is that these were small studies. We only have 2 to compare with, and there were wide margins of error around the estimates. So it's hard to say if we should really believe the results at this point. Additionally, another recent CDC study found that many adults are using e-cigarettes to try to quit smoking, but instead of actually stopping smoking cigarettes, they're continuing to use both products. So again, that does not help them, and they are possibly becoming even more nicotine addicted as a result. So that's the information I have. What I'm going to just say now, and then in terms of key points, if you want to talk to parents and you get questions, I think one of the biggest points is that you need to just emphasize to them e-cigarettes do not produce just a water vapor. They produce an aerosol that has particles and ultrafine particles that contain nicotine, chemicals, and potentially cancer-causing compounds that can cause lots of effects, including respiratory and eye irritation. They can be absorbed deeply into the lung. They can cause other health issues in the parents themselves. Number 2, e-cigarette aerosol exposure to children is not safe, results in both secondhand and third-hand aerosol effects and results, and we do not know exactly what it's going to do to the children who are exposed repeatedly. And the third is that at this point we do not have enough evidence to say that e-cigarettes have been shown to help smokers to quit at this point. Okay, so I'm done with the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
You know, I'm curious, how much do e-cigarettes cost, and how does that relate to the cost of cigarettes, tobacco cigarettes?
I've not looked at this lately, but when I looked at it before, they're actually kind of expensive, and but the issue is that if you get the refillable kind in the long run, they might be cheaper. But I can get back with the group on that. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
And then the other question I have is, why are there no regulations on e-cigarettes at all? I mean, I see that benzene is listed as a chemical. I mean, that's one of the most carcinogenic chemicals out there. How is it that there's no government oversight or regulations on this? Is it just too soon?
They're actively working on this, and the FDA is actively working on this. I think it's coming for sure, and there's a lot of people who are completely outraged about this. So it's coming. It's just not here yet.
I thought it was a very good talk. I appreciate the information.
You're welcome.
Does anyone have any other questions for Dr. Mojave Gittens around vaping? Okay, well, always feel free. If questions or concerns come up, you can definitely shoot those to me, and we will help you out with those. I did want to mention we are working on the final edits to the vaping resource, similar to the other resources that we've given you for families. So you should expect that probably in the next couple of weeks that you'll be able to give to families. Well, thank you again, Dr. Mojave Gittens, for that presentation. I know I had heard from a number of practices that they're getting a lot of parents who are vaping and don't think that there are any risks from it. So we really appreciate you educating us about this.
You're welcome.
All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Sam. She is going to go through the monthly run charts. And again, just a reminder that these are for data submitted for May 1st through June 1st. So if you submitted data, even if it falls in that time period that it was submitted after June 1st, just remember that that won't be reflected in the charts that you'll be seeing today. That would be reflected in, it will be pulled into next month's charts. So Sam, if you're on the line, I see also you should be able to advance your slides, but if you need help with that, just let me know.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I wanted to start off instead of diving right into the data, since we're kind of a little past the point and then we're heading towards wrapping this up around October. If you have had any recent successes that you would like to share with the group, whether it's an interaction with a patient or their family or something that you're doing within your clinical flow, to just take a moment and share that and see if there are any lessons learned that you've embraced that others might want to incorporate into their practice.
So this is Kristen. I just wanted to share because I know Dr. Long from Eastgate Pediatrics is not on the line. She's not able to join us today, but she and I were emailing, I think it was last week or week before, about a couple of things, and she did mention to me that she had a parent that came in whom she had gotten connected with the quit line for the father who wasn't, I think, attending the appointments, but and the parent reported that they had gotten connected with the quit line and that the husband had quit smoking using the services of the quit line. So that was a really nice success to hear about.
Thanks for sharing that, Kristen. And if there aren't any successes or something that doesn't come to mind right away, I'd also like to have the time if there's a certain challenge or barrier that you're facing as we're rounding out some of the testing phase and moving more towards how we can embed this for the long haul and sustainability. If there are barriers that you're facing, to kind of voice those as well. I know we mentioned some of them on our touch base calls about 6 weeks ago, but if there's anything else that's come up as we've gotten a little deeper into this so that we can help circumvent any of those issues as well.
Well, I think initially I wasn't happy every 2 months giving out these questionnaires, but I am seeing that sometimes the moms that bring the kids in, and if the spouse or somebody else in the family is smoking, that they've obviously tried to understand it a little bit more and maybe a little bit more open for them to stop smoking and maybe being more productive. You know, I give them the helpline number. I don't have all the follow-up to know, but I do sense that they seem like, oh gosh, she's going to talk about it again, so maybe I should listen. And we have a few more like family members that, you know, the mom is trying to push to help stop smoking also.
That's great. That's good to hear. It's planting the seed and then seeing, you know, how that's growing over the series of well-child visits. Anything else that others would like to share before I move into data?
This is Dr. Fenigo, HioPeds. I think that some people are unsure of making a commitment to the quit line at the time of the visit when they have so many other things to think about at that well-child visit. So I do hand out the information and point out that they can call themselves, and I think that, you know, is is a little more palatable sometimes when they have time to go home and talk it over and think about it. And it would almost make sense to have the quit line do an outreach call, like, that people could sign up for, that doesn't necessarily commit them to a program. They could ask later on if you're interested or not.
That's good. And have you had time, or enough time elapsed for those that you have kind of given the information to instead of signing them up? Have they come back for a subsequent well visit and have any kind of anecdotes?
Yeah, I've had some success. Not everyone, but
Okay.
Some people do consider it and do it at home, I think.
Okay, that's good. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you for those that have shared. And if you do think of anything else that's either a success that you'd like to share or something as you go back and see patients that's challenging or a barrier for you, feel free to email Kristen or myself so we can help work through or share any of those items and see if other practices are experiencing the same thing or if they have any feedback on how they've handled something. So by now, we should all be very familiar with the key driver diagram that I present on each and every of our action period phone calls that highlights what we're trying to accomplish as we move and close out the month of June and wrap up our final 3 months of this, looking to make sure that we have gotten a good foundation of getting the screening tool into place and then working on how we're handling the positive screens that result from that, be it referring to the quit line, and we've talked about some of those options that we could do there, and then working through the different 5A components of information and resources and how you can arrange those items with the caregivers. So one of the data that we're collecting outside of our main measures is just looking at smoke exposure within the home. We've presented this on previous phone calls, and just looking collectively at household smoking in the lighter blue line with the circle, hovering just over 15%. And then you can see that we have more others within the home that are smoking than those caregivers that are presenting in the office. The screening tool uptake, I did want to commend everyone. I know we spoke on previous calls and on our touch bases that sometimes those repeat visits are a challenge, and that we felt that those may be pulling us down in those earlier months and that we weren't having what we would expect with the screening tool uptake. But now we've had 2 months in a row where we've trended upward. We were almost at our goal last month, and now we've exceeded our goal of getting that tool out to more than 90% of our families that are attending well child visits birth through 1 year of age. So I think that really attests to all the different tests of change that each of you have been working on, be it with families that are coming in initially or that challenge of getting that repeat tool out and having families complete it every 2 months. What you guys are doing is working. So now our next steps are kind of honing that, making sure that we're doing it consistently and holding the gains that we've made as we round out the final months of this collaborative. This here, like we presented last month, is a breakdown of each of your own screening tool uptakes. Again, we have a lot of practices, so each are represented by their own colored line, and you can see that information here. I'll give you a minute to quick find your practice and see that, and then you'll also be able to see that on your individual practice reports that Kristen sends out. I'll just give you a minute to look at this, and then I'll move the slide for the other individuals to see.
I'm not locating Ohio Peds on this.
You might be on the next slide then.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, and then here's the next one. And there you are. You're in the light purple.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
You're welcome. I think in general, we're all doing very well in getting up towards that goal and working now towards consistently doing this. What we have now is measure 2, and this is looking collectively at smoking resources being provided to any type of caregiver, and then how that breaks down with respect to the overall population of those that screen positive for having a caregiver discussion and resources, or having a discussion about other individuals that are smoking in the home and other resources. We had a little bit of a downward trend last month, but we caught back up and exceeded where we were previously in the month of May, where we're hovering just around 75-78% of the time that collectively we're giving appropriate resources or offering them and attempting to have discussions with any individual within the home that is smoking. And then similar to what we had on the screening tool uptake, again, your practice will be represented by the same color line. So you can see the first half of practices on this chart, and then the other half will be on the next. A little more variation as we work on smaller sample size of those individuals that do screen positive within each of your respective practices. So those that have a very small sample size of positive screens, we've seen pretty consistently that there's a good deal of variation. So as we wrap up these coming months, honing our skills that when someone does screen positive, that we're performing the same tasks with each of those families. And then here's the other half of the practices. And again, all this data will be broken down on your individual charts, so you'll be able to see this a little cleaner and a little larger when those are made available to you. Okay, and then this breaks down what we saw in that collective measure. So we're looking now only at other individuals that screen positive within the home. The dark blue line is collectively how we're doing in having both a discussion and giving a resource. And the one component that brings us down and kind of is the rate limiting step is having resources and offering those to individuals. You can see that our line very closely mirrors that. We're doing fairly well in our discussion, but that collective component of having a discussion and offering a resource is right around 80%. So a little work to do on that, but we can see that we're doing fairly well in the discussion. So if we bump up our resource providing those, we'll be able to bump up the measure as well. And then this looks at those caregivers that are in the office who have screened positive for smoking, how we're performing at having discussions with them in person and then also giving them resources. Very similar to the previous measure, again, having the resources provided to that caregiver is the component of this measure that's lower performing. So that's another area that we can continue to kind of work on to pull up our measure and get closer to that 80% mark with our caregiver discussion. Then we have the use of the 5 A's. So this builds upon what you were doing with having a discussion or attempting to have one, offering resources to our families, our caregivers that screen positive, and then offering a referral. Whether or not they accept that, it's just that you have done the task of saying, would you like to be referred? They can accept or they can decline. We saw a little bit of uptick in this past month of data in your process of having referrals being offered, and that's kind of the main component that's bringing this measure down, but also this is a 3-pronged measure, so having the discussion, offering resources, and providing of smoking caregivers that receive all 3 of those components. And then this builds upon that last measure to see, of those that you have worked to give information to, be it counseling or resources, and have referred them to the quit line, these are the ones that accepted. And we saw a fairly steep downward trend and had some discussions on touch-base calls in last month about why families aren't accepting this referral, but we saw an uptick. So I think this past month, maybe the different things that you guys have trialed with the caregivers and how you're approaching the referral, or maybe it's these repeat encounters of individuals coming back that you've planted the seed with, we see an upswing in those individuals that accepted the referral to the quit line. And while we're only at 20%, it's higher than where we were last month, and we're moving in the right direction. So I think a pat on the back for that, and then we can work collectively to see how else we can approach that, even if it's just planting the seed, as someone had mentioned earlier, that we're doing that and then kind of tracking that and the subsequent visits and following up on what we have offered to these families. And then finally, our safe sleep resources and how we're doing with that. A second month in a row, again, that we have gone up in this measure in the dark blue line. This, again, is a 2-pronged measure where you have to have a safe sleep discussion and then provide a resource to say that this was appropriately done. Similar to our other 2 smoking cessation measures, the providing a resource is a component that's the lower performing component of the measure. We're doing fairly well at our discussion. So I think overall, kind of looking at how we can differently approach the provision of resources would help those 3 measures and moving closer to our goals of 90%. But overall, we've seen some good upward trends in several of our measures, and I think that speaks to all the hard work that you guys are doing. So just keeping that up, and we'll see how that trends out over the coming months as we wrap things up. I did want to say that we had a PDSA that was due on June 20th. If you haven't submitted to us that last week, please take a moment to kind of review your records and see what tests of change you've done and write that up and submit that to us. If you're having trouble thinking of something to do for that final PDSA, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Kristen. We're happy to kind of walk through some ideas. And if you're looking for other tests of change, if you feel like you've gotten to where you would like to be in terms of your practice-specific measures and are looking for more long-term and sustainability, we're happy to discuss those items with you as well. So it really just depends where you are in your improvement process and how you feel your measures are performing, and we're happy to have conversations at either of those levels to help you in these final months. So with that, I will pass it over to Kristen for any reminders that she has, unless people have questions.
Yeah, did anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts about the data that Sam just shared? If not, I will just mention a couple of things. So as Sam said, keep up the great work. We saw a lot of upward trends in the measures this month. So keep doing what you're doing. I know you're working very hard at this, so we really appreciate that. Also just wanted to mention, as Sam said, we will be wrapping up this wave of the collaborative in October. So we want to start thinking about sustainability, and we will be scheduling individual calls again probably in the month of August. Again, just to touch base, talk about any kind of sustainability challenges or planning for that, and then address any other concerns that you have at that point. I also want to mention that we are beginning recruitment for Wave 2 of the project. And that is actually going to launch. We're going to have the learning session at our annual meeting, the Ohio AAP's annual meeting. So if you have colleagues, other practices that you think would be interested in this work, please let them know about it. Reach out to me and let me know, and I'll reach out to them. We would love to have some of you also at annual meeting to talk about the work that you've done on this collaborative. So be looking you'll be getting some mailings and things about Wave 2 of the project. And then just to also mention that our next action period call will be on Tuesday, July 24th at 12 p.m. If you have ideas or topics that you would like to hear about on action period calls, please also send me an email with those, because we essentially will have about 4 left in the collaborative. So if there are topics or things you'd like to know about, please make sure you send me those ideas. Did anyone have any other questions, comments, concerns, or anything else we need to address today?
No, thank you.
All right. Well, as always, we are here via email or call if you need anything, and keep up the great work, and we will join together again in a month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Kristen?